Sound awakens something deep within. Welcome to this podcast, a space to slow down, tune in, and return to the song of your soul. In this sixth episode, I am joined by Steve Tonsager, who is the author of 5 books and founder of IBFRT and Whisperology. Hi, Steve. Thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. I wanted to ask you what your background is and how you got into this, whatever you're doing right now, and which I will have you explain.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Lakshmi. It's fun to talk about what I do, and it is helpful if I explain just a little bit of how I have come to do what's called Whisperology. Whisperology is a kind of spiritual system that relies on accessing information that is available to us through certain kinds of methods. And being able to recognize that kind of information wouldn't be possible without a context. And so my context has had several parts to it. Originally, I was a biochemist, a toxicologist. After that, I also spent some time as a Lutheran minister and a nursing home administrator. Later in my life, I studied acupuncture and oriental medicine and a form of homeopathy called field control therapy. When I developed my acupuncture practice, I had other tools available to me, and I was not satisfied with the lack of specificity when it came to delivering outcomes with acupuncture. And I realized that there was a much more powerful tool. And I think that using the word intention is a great way to express that. And so while an acupuncture needle or a medication or an herb or whatever it might be has an intention about it, I feel like the most powerful intentions begin somewhere else than in either conventional or alternative medicine. And it led me to develop this system called Whisperology, which is based on getting into a certain state where we can identify what we call coherence and the lack of coherence on many different levels. And I hadn't found a system that allowed me to do that or appreciate that our physical selves and all that's connected to that is just the tip of an iceberg. It's really just the a level of manifestation of what we hold in consciousness. So if we could get to the roots of consciousness and work with consciousness through intention, we would have a different way of not only improving our physical health, but our emotional and mental and spiritual health.
That is beautiful, Steve. Thank you so much for coming up with such a beautiful system called Whisperology, which is purely intention based. And can you talk a little bit about like the intention? How do we make sure our each action is kind of intensified purely and centered?
That requires what we call in Whisperology getting out of the way, because we believe that we access a different form of knowing. There's the knowing that I have and everyone has in their own way through formal and informal education, but it shares in common the idea that somehow we identify our sense of self with that information. Whisperology believes that when we get ourselves out of the way, we tap into a different way of knowing. We're fond of using the word source. We could use other words that mean similar things. Uh, and I'm open to the use of other words, but the idea is that we are connecting with something outside of that which we are consciously connected to. So one might call it a form of intuition, a form of imagination. Uh, One might call it a form of connecting through a spiritual impulse to something that is outside of space time. And when we are in that kind of a place, we have the opportunity to become reverent and humble that there's a different kind of knowing than what we've typically built our belief systems around. We actually are exposed in this process to unconsciously held limiting beliefs that hold us back from knowing in a different way and how that affects us.
Yeah, it's amazing how intention can be very streamlined and how we can actually access different things out of it.
And Whisperology has its own way of doing that. And the way that we go about that is spending a lot of time in the identification of the target of our intention. And we begin that process not by starting with a particular concern, physical or non physical, a sort of an allopathic way of looking at our life and then finding some sort of a treatment or a solution. Instead, we suspend that belief that we have with the idea that there's maybe a different target. That also takes into account the idea of timing, which is kind of a karmic concept. So there may be lots of things that are affecting us in ways that we don't know that are holding us back. But there is a timing. I would call it a kind of divine timing that comes from source. And we don't know that timing, but when we are humble, when we are open, we can receive that information for the timing. So whisperology always begins with this question of where do I begin? Not my best ideas. And when we do that, source will tell us that we need to focus the target of our attention in a spiritual domain or in an emotional domain or a mental domain. Or if it is a physical domain, we don't say, well, I guess I have a problem with my shoulder, so I'm only going to look at the shoulder. Maybe the source of that is in a completely different system, and maybe it's not even physical. So we spend time listening, and we call that being the whispery, being whispered to by source. Once we find that target, so we've not chosen it, it's been received, then we ask about that target to find a deeper level of streamlining, to use your word, a level of specificity. So it may be that the target is grief, but maybe we need to be more specific, and it takes us to some particular event in our life or in a prior lifetime. Maybe the target is our respiratory system. We need to target uh, the lower lobe of the left lung, not the respiratory system as a whole. When we have found that specific target, whisperologists feel a sense of peace that we call a resonance. Once we have that, we further rely on source to tell us what to do with that target. And so we have all kinds of actions that are possible. We express them in verbs, determine what it is that we should do. So we actually craft that intention through source. Maybe we have some sort of bacterial incoherence. We don't assume that we have a germ to be eradicated. We have a harmonization that needs to happen because it's a part of us. We wouldn't know that unless we were receiving what it was we were to do with our target. Or maybe that the target is something non-physical, maybe a target like grief, but maybe it isn't about uh, grief as a whole. Maybe we need to identify a specific limiting belief And then what are we supposed to do with that? Are we supposed to harmonize it? Are we supposed to delete it? Are we supposed to, what are we supposed to do with it? So we use that same kind of truth seeking activity to identify target and then what we should do with that target. So that's how we streamline intention in Whisperology.
It's just very intriguing to me. And can you tell me a little bit about how do you get to that mindful, complete present state to be able to access whatever you are accessing through source or whatever you call it?
The way that I do it and the way that I teach my students to do it is to welcome, to invite, uh, and to be cognizant that everything is purposeful,
Mm.
that source, God, the divine,
Mhm.
is always there waiting for us, uh, and that we need to be reverent, we need to be humble, and so I teach different words
Mhm.
that you might call them affirmations. Some of them are like prayers or invocations. One of my favorite ones is let us, meaning all of us that are gathered in the space, myself and the patient, but also the invisible witnesses around us.
Uh-huh.
Let's, let us honor what Source is manifesting at this time.
Mm.
We we do everything we can to not make it about ourselves. And for me, the language of presence is very powerful. So one of the things that Whisperology likes to say is that human beings, each of us are a limited presence, but we are an aspect of the unlimited presence.
Uh-huh.
And that unlimited presence is what allows this exchange of information to take place. We couldn't do that unless we weren't also at the same time source in a limited sense. And so we don't talk about God as somehow being out there away from us, but we talk about God or source, or my favorite words, the unlimited presence that we are. We just don't consciously connect in that way typically. And the people who have the hardest time getting out of the way to do this, I think, are the people who have acquired through various means tremendous amounts of skills and abilities, because when we do whisperology, we surrender that. So we surrender whatever our skills, our knowledge is, because we believe there's a higher level, a higher context of intelligence. And that's captured, I think, when we see ourselves as expressions, as manifestations of an unlimited presence.
That is spectacular, the way you worded everything. Yes. And I totally believe how you said we are the manifestation of that unlimited presence. And how do we always have that presence of mind that we are that unlimited?
I think that's so difficult because of what people call the evidence of our senses. And so our senses would tell us that we are separate. Our senses reinforce our differences. Our senses get us to believe that what we see, and although we only see a small portion of what's there, that's a different subject, we we ascribe a permanence, a reality, a separateness to that. And when we are in that mindset, we lose our sense of oneness, our sense of connectedness, our sense of everything being connected by a common purpose,
Mhm.
source expressing itself in an infinite number of ways to no source.
Mhm.
And that's that type of connectivity, whether you want to talk about it from a quantum mechanics point of view or a spiritual point of view, that's what allows this kind of healing to take place at all, because we aren't separate. We're actually one. And there's a quality of of illusory separateness that is reinforced by what I think I'm seeing, what I think I'm hearing, what I think I'm smelling, and so on and so forth. So that is a that is a struggle. So we have to find ways, and I believe one of the best ways that at least it works well for me and for my students is to find your own daily meditations, or for some people it's mantras, for other people it's prayers. And so Whisperology has a meditation which I wrote. It's I think very powerful, but it states all of these kinds of ideas in it, and we are subject to what we hold in mind or consciousness. So we need to keep it in front at all.
We need that should be on the top of our head, and we should be mindful of that idea or thought.
Well, it's hard to.
And you talk about whisperology in a sense of a field resonance testing, right?
Yes.
So, in that sense, can you explain a little bit about how the biofield and where in the biofield your targets are and how you're working through that?
The way that I would speak about that is to use a metaphor.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite metaphors for this would be the idea that there is a blueprint, kind of informational field. It's a field that has come from source. That field can be described by certain qualities, even if we can't physically see them. That's, I think, where concepts like resonance or vibration have their role. But that way of thinking allows us to ascribe other qualities like vibration, like consciousness, like levels of power to things which also we cannot see. And so in Whisperology, we like to say that the body is governed by its informational fields. And those fields, I think, are not quite the same as the biofield. I used to use that language, and I think it's very helpful. But because I've become so much less persuaded by the power of biology and the healing power of the non physical, I see that informational field as something that precedes what I think most people call the biofield, because I don't ascribe the electromagnetic characteristics that are measurable, that are created through various therapies, as actually the informational field itself. I believe the power for those therapies to work is comes from a non-physical domain, which is that informational network from source. When it reaches another level of manifestation, we have a biofield. And when we go to another level, we start to have uh, atoms and molecules and cells and tissues and organs and so on and so forth. But there's a distinction for me between the ways that some people will talk about the biofield and this, I would call it, deeper level of an informational network.
How is informational field kind of different from the biofield? Is it because of the electromagnetic fields being not there in the informational field?
So I think that's right. I think it's before the birth of that biofield, to use that kind of language. I think before that, there is um, I can't think of a better word except a deep abiding purposefulness that comes from source. It would be almost like saying source purposefulness is reflected, it is manifested first in an informational field. And um, and even that distinction gets blurry, because I would say that as soon as consciousness births anything, including source consciousness, is information. And information and energy is probably only an artificial separation because of our 4D nature, because of space time. Time gives things a momentum, which is not there, I think, in the absence of a physical manifestation. And that, of course, allows us to work non-locally. Work allows us to, for example, in Whisperology, last week I treated a woman in Bosnia. Yeah, so that wouldn't be possible if we only were wedded to time. Um, a couple weeks ago, I had somebody here, and we were back looking at something that happened when they were 5. How that we could go in, because time has the quality of timelessness, unless both domains weren't present at the same time. So we actually get into using language that doesn't kind of make sense, because it doesn't, it just, the mystery is too deep. We bend time, we stop time, we go back in time, we move time, all at the same time. We are living in something that feels very sequential, very concrete, very distinct. So these therapies or systems like Whisperology recognize the eternal within time. They recognize the timeless within time. They recognize that there is a universal eternal purpose that's still present in the particulars of a limited presence.
It's very detailed. I want to know more about how this timelessness and this space time is just so fluid. Can you give me a brief description of how I can wrap my mind around it? I know it's a physics thing, but
That's a great question. I can try. I don't know if I can give you a very good answer than that. I'm not. I, I like to tease, and I say, well, that's probably way above my pay grade, because I'm fond of saying these 3 words: I don't know. And I feel like there's a lot that I have learned. My context has changed and expanded as I've been open to source leading me to develop Whisperology, and to test thoughts and ideas and see that they actually do work. They don't fit in Newtonian physics. So I don't have to be convinced intellectually about things. I've been convinced by the things which take place. We have such a small perspective on what we are as human beings. Don't think we grasp the idea of what it means to be a limited presence, and what it means to be part of source. So we awaken our awareness to this timeless aspect of ourselves through our spiritual work. And I would just encourage you to keep thinking in that way. So I like to think about that all under the rubric of purpose. I do believe everything is thoroughly purposeful. And sometimes there are illusions created by our experience in time space that make us think differently. And I can't think of a better example than all of the misfortunes that and changes that people experience. The only thing that is constant is change. And yet it doesn't seem to move people off the security they feel about being solid and about being physical, and about the, I think, the fear that keeps us separate and disconnected. It's almost like we lack the imagination to know what we would be like if we actually embraced and lived the idea that we were expressing source.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around it. Yes, that kind of makes sense. So you're saying we have to believe that we are that unlimited presence and we are always in touch or part of it, and we have to actually know that we are beyond what we are physically.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think the more that you think that way, the more you can take any concept that you like. And because space time is such an unexamined quality in most people, what would it be like if you imagine every time that you were expressing
Mhm.
some intention, that intention wasn't just manifesting in space time in terms or of the people around you, where you're sitting. The what if it included the whole world,
True.
the whole universe, and not only right now in this moment, like, oh yeah, we're all connected. Yes, of course. But what if that also took out the illusion of time itself, and what you are doing now actually was um, because it's timeless as well, was influencing all time.
Mhm.
What do? We are so wedded to this idea of you can't change the past. You have no control over the future. So where do most people live? They live in regret and guilt over their past, and they live in fear of the future. And Whisperology is another way, just another aspect of looking at what does it mean to live present, not in the present, but to live present. What does it mean to imagine that you're not just living locally,
Mhm.
temporally, you're living timelessly and globally?
That's beautiful. Yeah. So you're saying that Whisperology is, in other words, being mindful of this moment.
Mindfulness is that's a great word for Whisperology and many things too. Yes. Yeah,
So this is the moment that we need to seize to be anything or do anything.
I think so. And I think that why that impulse is so alive and active in some and not in others, I don't know the answer to that.
Mhm.
But if what I said before is true about the timeless is in all time,
Mm.
then how would we ever possibly know, at least on this side of the fence, that whatever we intend doesn't also influence all the other aspects of who we are outside time space in terms of their intention? But that we have that opportunity, and I think that's another way of speaking about what it means to be source-like is we can birth intention. This is something that I think no matter what spiritual or religious beliefs you have, most people share that idea is that creation
Mhm.
about intention, and uh, and it's difficult for us to believe that we also are creators. And that's also because of the evidence of our senses. If we don't see it, we choose not to believe it. And we'll say, well, that's wishful thinking, or that's an illusory belief. And yet, um, the belief systems that we have given rise to the world that we mostly experience here in space time. It's far from accidental. It's thoroughly purposeful. And so with Whisperology, we talk a lot about levels of consciousness. So our world in its various forms reflects those levels of consciousness that have given birth to what it is that we eventually see through the uh, limited lens of our senses.
Wow, that's beautiful. So, in that sense, like if we are the creators, can we not change our reality just based on our thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. One of my favorite authors, um, and he was echoing the wisdom of millennia, said that we are subject to what we hold in mind. We are subject to what we hold in consciousness. I mean, mind as in brain, but as in that aspect of what we really are. We are mind, not brain. We are mind, and so we manifest whatever it is that we hold in mind. The hard part is when we want to manifest something positively, some sort of change. Uh, Time space gets us, and so does our fears. And so it's very common for someone to say, well, I would like to be different. I sure hope things get better. I guess it doesn't hurt to try. If we look at the level of consciousness that is expressing those kinds of thoughts, um, we have a kind of wishful thinking. We don't have the awareness or belief that we actually are creating what it is. And so uh, it's helpful for people to figure out what it feels like when you are creative. We don't get very far at all. There's no healing power in fear or shame or apathy or pride, but there is tremendous healing power when those thoughts that we have are actually wedded to joy, when they're wedded to love, when they're wedded to hope, to gentleness, to humility. We call those the 9 karmic gifts, gifts of the spirit in Whisperology. That's where the power for change is. It's not in the fear of, well, maybe things won't work out. We we're almost afraid to embrace this quality, this essential information about who we really are. We are source. Um, Another one of my favorite teachers and friends is the late Bill Tiller, and he was very fond of saying, "We are spiritual beings having a physical experience," and I think that is a short and beautiful way of expressing that. But as long as we believe that we are physical beings, we'll continue to be mostly run by our beliefs in separateness, our belief in the senses, our belief in uh, uh, all of the mechanisms the ego would have to somehow believe that we're being kept safe. All of that changes when the starting point is different. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. So, and that's where all the power is. That that's a power that, in my way of thinking, is at a deeper level than the manifestation of that power in different ways in a human or a biofield of any organism. That belief, that thought, that awareness that we are spiritual beings, to me, changes everything because it also tells us what we would need to do to heal.
Very true. Yeah. And I think that affirmation of we are that spiritual beings in this physical body gives so much power itself.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things that I think also are helpful for people who are learning to do whisperology, to getting out of the way. It's about where we begin. It's not um, come on, source, give me a pep talk. I want to be at my best. It's not a coach telling you to use the skills that you have. It's saying, go back to your source, go back to where you are, and trust that it will come through you. Um, so I think that a great way to begin affirmations, many people have done this, but it's an idea, is to begin with I am. And so one of my favorite little affirmations is to say something like this: I am unlimited presence, limited presence, Stephen Roger Tonsager, limited presence, unlimited presence, I am. For me, that's a very powerful affirmation. Um, uh, One of my friends, his name is Jerry Jim, has received a lot of affirmations from uh, a man named Joachim Whippich, and there are some beautiful, beautiful affirmations in there. And there have been times when I've shared those with my patients, and there's one that goes something like this: I am the most amazing, delightful thoughts creation I am. And when you say that to somebody and they hear I, because they're thinking personally,
Right.
I am the most amazing. Wait a minute, that sounds like bragging and boasting, and what you don't think that um, you think you're better than other people. I think when we use the language that we're accustomed to and we think in terms of the culture,
Mm-hmm.
we take a beautiful affirmation like that and we've already personalized it. So we've missed the point, which is we are amazing, delightful, incredibly creative parts. Parts is the wrong language of source. And that isn't meant as an inflationary statement, but it is a statement about the deepest part of our being. And when we're connected to that, amazing things happen, which defy the explanations of conventional thinking.
And you talk about in your book how you have these different vectors, right? Like the
Yes.
emotions. And I understood that in a way like where we are rising from the bottom to top.
Okay.
Because you kind of have to rise above your fears, your guilt, your insecurities, and you have to go about your joy, your other supreme levels of emotions. So, how do you explain those um, briefly? How do we get to higher vectors?
I think we do it, first of all, by identifying a particular um, vector or more than one vector. I call it in my most recent book, I call it the karmic portrait.
Mhm.
The idea of this is that our incarnation is thoroughly purposeful, uh,
Mhm.
which would include the circumstances of our birth, the choice of our parents, and so on and so forth, as well as all of the things that somehow we bring with us into this life.
Mhm.
But they're organized under um, a a purpose, and that purpose is to manifest in a more complete, more coherent, more conscious way uh, one of the spiritual gifts. All of the spiritual gifts are connected. We have all of them, but there's something in particular that we need to work on. And at the same time, we can also, through Whisperology, become aware of the place in which we are least developed, least conscious, and we call that the least conscious karmic vector. And there's teaching and guidance in all of it. So when we identify that, the next step is to become aware of why it is that this is going to be a challenge for us.
Mhm.
And it's probably been a challenge for us in other domains and other dimensions, I would say in other lifetimes, but we don't have to go there. But given that, there are going to be uh, probably a few what I call key limiting
Mhm.
unconsciously held beliefs. These beliefs manifest in our bodies. They manifest in terms of the people that we meet. They manifest in terms of the cycles that keep repeating. Why is it that I keep running into these same kinds of people? Why is it that no matter what I do, things keep turning out the way that they do? These are purposeful messages, purposeful parts of our source experience as a limited presence, and they're there not to make us miserable, but to wake us up, help us to become more conscious. And I believe this is what I teach in Whisperology: is that the first step is to shine the light of consciousness on that which is outside of our awareness. That is reflected in those unconsciously held limiting beliefs. Now I have the opportunity to become very specific about those beliefs, to explore them. And as soon as something comes into our awareness, relationship to it immediately changes. It's an instantaneous change. And as soon as that happens, we begin to, and for different people, the process varies, but the energy that was stored in that unconsciously held limiting belief that somehow was incoherent to our purpose can begin to change. And then as we engage our conscious self in the process of addressing those limiting beliefs, um, it allows us to evolve, it allows us to change. And we also notice when that happens, it changes not only the way that we feel physically, but it changes the kinds of relationships, it changes the kind of people that happen to come into our life. Sometimes this is it was popularized by calling it the law of attraction, but there is this connectedness within source that draws and pulls different things toward us based on what we are holding in mind. So what we're holding in mind changes as we become more conscious of that which interferes with us being aligned to our purpose.
That makes total sense. Like, I've been hearing a lot of people saying, hey, I'm unable to break these patterns. They keep repeating in my life, this and that. You're saying that once they realize that, once they become aware of that, they can consciously change it because they're not being victims, but they're taking that responsibility and um, changing those patterns.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, uh, the victim is can't be seen apart from the perpetrator, and so they belong to the same level of consciousness. There's not one without the other, and what people often can discern is that there is an inner perpetrator, and not just some external purpose, cause, authority, whatever it might be. And when we become aware of that, um, we recognize that that cycle of victim and perpetrator doesn't move us forward in any way, whichever side we would choose to adapt, whether we want to beat ourselves up for those things which we have difficulty changing, or we want to feel sorry for ourselves as we feel so stuck. They're just two sides of the same coin.
Right. And then as we are taking responsibility, your word purpose comes into play. Like
Yeah.
everything is here for a reason. And we need to identify that and keep moving forward by recognizing those beliefs and patterns and triggers.
Yes, we can become aware of those things which we think or feel or do,
Mhm,
which manifest our purpose.
mhm,
And um, we have so much feedback in the bio body suit when we do that. So
mhm,
it's very easy in whisperology to often identify some kind of a physical issue. It may be mild, it may be very serious. And sometimes to get people to move to the next step, I will identify an unconsciously held limiting belief, and I'll ask, for example, if there is a particular place where that's manifested in the body, and it would have no physical, anatomical, conventional connection. Uh, I, you might be holding on to some terrible kind of limiting belief that's interfering with you being aligned with the karmic vector of joy, and the absence of joy is grief. And let's say that we identify the key unconsciously held limiting belief. Be, before we would use that belief to bring it into awareness to help, I might ask Source for a location. So let's say it's the mobility of, as an example, right shoulder joint. So I might ask you to lift your arm, to rotate your arm, to feel the level of incoherence within that shoulder, whether it's some soreness or it's a lack of mobility. And we will take that limiting belief, we'll craft it with Source's guidance into the limiting belief statement, very, very specific verbs, very, very specific object, until Source tells it we're at the right level of specificity. We have a coherent intention statement. Now, if I hand that intention statement to you, I have you read that, and we'll ask Source, do I need to read that 3 times or 6 times or a dozen times? You read that statement. Now I ask you to move your shoulder, and you move your shoulder without any restriction of any kind. I liked doing those exercises with people because they would never make that connection, that what they are holding in mind, consciously or unconsciously, is influencing the way that even this bio bodysuit, which is considered to be so real, is subject to the mind. It's much easier in our world to say, well, you should go see the physical therapist. You better go have some needles put in your shoulder. How about a pain medication? Let's take care of that. To me, those are all treatments. They don't heal. We heal by letting go of our um, limiting beliefs about ourselves and about others. And that, to me, is the key to healing. So we're very big on contrasting treatment versus healing. Healing is a thoroughly internal spiritual process. Treatment, whether it's conventional or alternative, no matter how fancy or how simple, to me, is an external uh, um, treatment, which doesn't mean it isn't helpful. It often does. I don't think it reaches the root.
Totally agree, Steve. Yeah, when you say healing, it changes from your core.
Yes.
But when you say treatment, it's just pretty much at one level.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's beautiful. Like how you've developed all of this and you're um, making it a reality for a lot of people's lives to change themselves from within and radiate it forth. So, we are really grateful to have this tool around us.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful too, and I people have often asked me what my vision is, and I think that Whisperology is a very beautiful way democratizing health on all levels. So you don't have to go to uh, an expert. Actually, Source is Source is the expert, to use that as language. But what I do think Whisperology can do is tap people into healing. And I believe those gifts for healing, to be a creator, to be author of our own lives, our own intention, has been given to every one of us, no matter what ethnicity, what sex, what age, how many degrees you have. It's an intrinsic, but mostly hidden potential that we have because we are unlimited presence. We just don't believe it.
That is beautifully said. Yes, Steve, I totally agree. And that is something that we are all striving for, like to believe that and to have that in our consciousness all the time. And if we can do that, I positive that we all can be a source within
Yes.
and writing same thing.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Steve, for your time today. We truly appreciate you and your time and for everything you've shared.
You're very welcome. Happy to talk about it.
Thanks for tuning in. Take a deep breath, carry the peace with you, and I will see you next time.